Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 106. So, since last week's album of the week video, which was for Plenty of Power from Anvil, at the end of that video I did announce what was going to be this week's pick. So, we are in that week since I usually upload these album of the week videos on Monday. And since you are watching this on a Monday, well, and you can see by the artwork, it is the fourth studio album from Whitesnake. It is Come and Get It, which, when it was originally released, according to Wikipedia, apparently this is the US release, but right now I can't find anything anywhere else that would state on any sort of earlier month that this album was originally released. So this date is the default date. So here it is. It was originally released on April 6th, 1981, through, of course, the labels being either Mirage Records, at least throughout North America, being here in the US and in Canada, Polydor in Japan, and Liberty/Sunburst throughout the rest of the world. So, Come and Get It. This album, of course, comes off the heels of 3 releases that came out in 1980. I mean, they kicked off 1980 with their first live release, which was Live at Hammersmith, which was a 6-track live mini album, but it was a live album, just a very, very short live album. It was recorded on the heels of the tour for the Trouble album, which was their first full-length album, released in 1978, so it was on the heels of that, and they didn't get to at least release it until 1980. Then, again, a few months later, then comes their third studio album, that being Ready and Willing. And then, in November, they then released their second live album, which also can be considered their first actual proper full live album, which was, again, Live in the Heart of the City. And, again, that was their last release, which also I did. I pretty much have covered all 3 of those releases on this channel. So finally, here we are with Come and Get It, which, of course, with Ready and Willing, that actually saw the debut for drummer Ian Pace. So basically, making Whitesnake now, or at least bringing back together 3/3 of that almost Mach 3, Mach 4 lineup of Deep Purple. So again, David Coverdale on vocals, John Lord on keyboards, who at least had debuted with Whitesnake on the Trouble album, and then Ian Pace debuting on Ready and Willing. And so here, finally, up to Come and Get It. This, of course, will be the second full Whitesnake album that has this lineup, again, with the 3/5 or so of that Mach 3 or 4th lineup of Deep Purple. So again, pretty much continuing more of that sound of the David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes sort of sound, and in some cases it's really continuing that sort of sound like Burn and Stormbringer and Come Taste the Band. You really definitely, and this album really does bring that sound even more forward. And on this one, definitely the presence of these 3 key members of Deep Purple definitely shines on most of this album. So, alright. Of course here, this album, of course, was being at least recorded from at least July and September of 1980 to, of course, January of 1981. So they were recording this prior to releasing the Live in the Heart of the City in 1980. So finally it does, and it was all being recorded at Startling Studios in Tynehurst Park, Ascot, England. And of course, being produced by the late Martin Birch, who again sadly had passed away last year. But on this album, since there's always a nickname for him, he is at least named Martin Sir Larry Birch. So there's his name here. He always has at least a nickname or a middle name always added into every album he has ever produced or he's ever worked on. So there we go. We got Come and Get It. All right, so I guess from here on out, since I've already went into much of at least the sort of history on what was leading up to it, like the releases and so on up to this album, so it's definitely now focused on Come and Get It. All right, so for this album, we have about 10 songs here, and it all clocks in at 40 minutes and 24 seconds. So these 10 songs are the title track, Hot Stuff, Don't Break My Heart Again, Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, Wine, Women and Song, Child of Babylon, Would I Lie to You, Girl, Hit and Run, and then finally, Till the Day I Die. So there's your 10 songs. Now, since we're going to be at least comparing this to the last, the last 3 studio albums in some cases, especially also comparing this to at least the last album, Ready and Willing, and where this album, in terms of its sound, it's just its overall vibe is compared, and if there's any sort of at least differences. Well, I can definitely tell you this, when it comes to at least its similarities, I mean, it's no different really than any of, let's say, the Whitesnake albums, at least, that came prior to this, in terms of, like, either the Snakebite EP, or Trouble, or even Love Hunter, and, of course, Ready and Willing. It's still definitely, again, all those albums was continuing where at least Come Taste the Band at least left off, and especially, again, in terms of a sound really comparing to Burn and Stormbringer, it still really continues that sound because of that sort of sound when David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes at least had joined Deep Purple. They really kind of somewhat reshaped a bit of Deep Purple sound compared to when Ian Gillan and Roger Glover was in Deep Purple, so that Mach 2 sound. And in many ways, since Gillan had released his album Future Shock this year, and then there will be another album also that would have been released in 1981. You can definitely tell that where those sounds really broke apart because of Richie Blackmore. I don't want to completely go off on a tangent and try and get off track on, but I do have to bring up some of these because of Richie Blackmore. Definitely, even though he may have been one of the key ingredients to at least Deep Purple sound, but when it comes to his stuff that he was doing with Rainbow, whether it be the stuff with Ronnie James Dio in the band, or it been the ones with Graham Bonnet or even Joel Turner, it didn't sound like he was trying to keep that Deep Purple sound. And if anything, he was expanding, but even for just the sound even further, he was basically stretching it as far as he could. And it really kind of created his own sort of sound that actually fit more of Rainbow than really Deep Purple. So there was really a difference. Whereas guys like Ian Gillan and David Coverdale were definitely in some ways continuing their eras. They really didn't completely deviate from those from their eras in terms of the sound, because of with Future Shock, which was released from Gillan in 1981. It definitely, even though it's got its own unique feel, its own sound compared to his stuff with Deep Purple, it still had that Mach 2 era Deep Purple sound. It's just, again, expanded into his sort of way, but it still had those key characters that definitely had made at least the Mach 2 era Deep Purple, at least how it sounded with sounds like In Rock and Fireball, and of course Machine Head. And even Who Do We Think We Are? I hope that's how the album was correctly pronounced. But the same thing here with this one, with David Coverdale. Again, this one in many ways, even though it's definitely got that Deep Purple sound, it though for sure continues. It really has those Mach 3, Mach 4, or even what people would, I think, have considered Mach 5, and to me, I almost could consider this the unofficial Mach 5 Deep Purple lineup with this album in some cases, or even the Mach 6 in somewhat because of it. It really, it's just, again, Ian Gillan was continuing that Mach 2 era of Deep Purple sound, whereas with this one you really can hear he's definitely continuing with that. But at the same time, in comparison to Ready and Willing, compared to that album, which that album, while it has its upbeat moments, for the most part, it definitely sounded very, it had a very soulful, almost gospel in some ways, but it definitely, which gave it its more almost mournful and melancholic kind of feel in some cases, or in terms of its sound. It really kind of had its unique feel. It didn't try to basically try and recreate anything from like Trouble or the Snakebite EP or even Love Hunter. It really was its own unique album. And it definitely, again, that bluesy feel was even more felt throughout most of the album. But again, he definitely mixed in some. Again, it was what I think with Ready and Willing, it was basically what Stormbringer could have been. So it did what it could, what that album could have been, and I think it definitely, in my opinion, accomplished more compared to Stormbringer. Even if Stormbringer had at least 2 really good tracks, it still had some filler stuff that I think was more experimental and was probably more thought ideas and really actually great executed ideas. And I think if anything, those ideas finally got properly executed on Ready and Willing. So finally, on comparison with Come and Get It, instead of trying to make another sort of very mournful and somewhat soulful and melancholic sort of bluesy rock album, he basically, David Coverdale, John Lord, Ian Pace, and of course Mickey Moody, Neil Murray, and Bernie Marsden basically decided to somewhat go back a little bit to albums like Love Hunter and Trouble and even the Snakebite EP, but somewhat update it, where in some cases it ends up sounding like a transitional album between those albums and to the sound you'll probably end up getting with albums like Saints and Sinners and Slide It In, where you really can get that 80s sort of Whitesnake feel. It starts to creep in on this one. It's more upbeat, more energetic, a little more uplifting in some cases, where it's a little happier and a little more joyful compared to Ready and Willing. But it still has that real raw, nasty guitar bite that Martin Birch really definitely brought to Whitesnake's sound. It still has a very cool bite to it. So I mean, listen to again songs like, for example, Hot Stuff, Child of Babylon, Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, even Hit and Run. They just, and even Till the Day I Die, listen to some of these. There's at least a nice bite to it. Same thing even on the more, even again, more joyful songs like Come and Get It, Don't Break My Heart Again, which Don't Break My Heart Again actually really gives you the best idea of where the sort of, at least the sound was going to head into in albums like Saints and Sinners and Slide It In. You really start to get that with this song. It's definitely bringing that up here. And then, of course, Wine, Women, and Song is another sort of really upbeat kind of song, but there still is a very much a nice little bite to it that sounds great. Again, Hot Stuff also might be closer to more faster songs on here, that where it's not really trying to be speed metal, but it's just definitely at least fast and somewhat heavy enough. Again, it wouldn't have been too far off on some of any of the classic Mach 2, or not Mach 2, Mach 3 era Deep Purple kind of albums. It would have, same thing I would even say again for songs like Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, and Child of Babylon, and even Hit and Run, I think wouldn't have been too far off on like either Burn, for example. They definitely, these songs I feel would have fit in line with those songs. They wouldn't have been completely out of place. So they're definitely great tracks too. I really dig them. But I definitely should definitely talk about Child of Babylon. This one is definitely one of the, along with Till the Day I Die, as probably some of the probably one of the most very well written songs on this one. This really is, in some cases, kind of an underrated Whitesnake track, because it just has a cool sort of very nice, almost very medieval kind of opening in some cases, with the sort of wind blowing, and then it's almost sound, and then finally when it gets into at least the guitars and so on, just the instruments where they really just start kicking in, it just has a nice atmosphere to it that I think definitely wouldn't have been out of place on some of those Mach 3 or Mach 4 era Deep Purple albums. It's such a cool feel to it. And then of course Till the Day I Die, which again is another sort of great track on this one. This is probably one of the, it's a great ending to this album. Again, just with this sort of very, and again, this one might be more of a throwback to at least Ready and Willing, but at the same time with this sort of guitar, very up, almost Western kind of feel in some cases. The way it just starts the way that it does. And then finally when it just kicks into the song, it's an absolute kick-ass upbeat rocker. Just great stuff. Again, there's some great guitar soloing again. I mean, Mickey Moody and Bernie Marsden, I think, were definitely two of some of the best guitar players I think David Coverdale has ever worked with. In some cases, I mean, sure, no disrespect to John Sykes, he definitely did great for him. Same goes for Mel Galley from, of course, of a Trapeze, so another Trapeze era guy that David Coverdale had worked with. Again, Glenn Hughes, to of course the mention again. So again, they are all great players, and even of course even Adrian Vandenberg or Steve Vai, which I don't know. I think Steve Vai might be as on the bottom of at least guitar players I feel that David Coverdale has worked with, because of, I feel like his contributions was very little compared to what guys like Mickey Moody, Bernie Marsden, or Mel Galley and John Sykes really had brought to the table for at least David Coverdale. They brought a lot more to the table than like Steve Vai. And on this album, you still get plenty of that, because there's still plenty of great guitar solos on this album. And again, Martin Birch really knew how Whitesnake was supposed to sound in terms of when it comes to like the mixing and production and engineering department, because of some of the albums after this one, after at least Slide It In, really kind of suffered in terms of its production and its sound, because of Martin Birch was such a core part of Whitesnake's sound. It was like almost, and Martin Birch was like a unofficial seventh member of Whitesnake. He really added a lot of material. He really knew how to make the instruments really pop out and make everyone sound like a complete band. And you really get that on this one too. It's just, again, I can't really say anything bad about this album. Everything is at least still solid. It still sounds like a good, upbeat Whitesnake album. Again, there's always that sort of opinion from depending on who you ask, whether or not if this is as strong of an effort compared to either Ready and Willing or Love Hunter or even Trouble. Or even at times, even let's say Slide It In. Because it's really sandwiched in between even like Saints and Sinners. But depending on who you ask, this is either at times considered the weakest of the Whitesnake albums and these of this era, the more blues rock era of Whitesnake. This is at times considered the weakest. Me, every time I put this album on, I actually like it, and I have to say, even though I do definitely like Ready and Willing, I really tend to really stretch for this album at times when I'm in the mood for at least this era of Whitesnake. It's like it's either this album, Saints and Sinners, Love Hunter, or Trouble that I really tend to really gravitate towards. Ready and Willing, not so much, surprisingly. I mean, for some reason, every time I listen to this one, I try to almost see at least certain people's point of view on this album in terms of whether or not this album is as good as any of the ones before, or do I really, again, do I think that? Every time I put this album on, every time I leave this album when it gets done, I'm like, it's a good, solid album. I can't really find anything that would be its fault. Yes, not everything is completely strong within the lyrical department because of, again, yes, there's definitely some sort of, tongue-in-cheek kind of lyrics. I mean, with songs like Girl or What I Lie to You and Wine, Women, and Song. And it's even in some cases Hot Stuff. Even though if I think it's got a killer riff and it's got a killer beat to it, I really, again, even if it's a good track, there's still some questionable kind of lyrics that are just kind of alright. It almost seemed like they were just trying to phone in some lyrics because they couldn't come up with anything else, and just threw it together, and just because they had probably a good riff, good stuff, but they couldn't come up with anything that would be great that would mix with it, so they just kind of hammed it in some cases. And yes, you kind of get that, but at the same time, when the riffs and even the music quality I feel is strong enough, I think in many ways I tend to really overlook the sort of weakness of some of the lyrics. All right, that's where I'm at with this album. I think it's just a solid enough Whitesnake album. And again, as far as absolute personal favorites, I do like the title track, Hot Stuff, Don't Break My Heart Again, Lonely Days, Lonely Nights, Child of Babylon, Hit and Run, and then Till the Day I Die. Those are probably the standout songs for me in general. Yeah, I know I picked out quite a bit. But again, I just can't find anything that I don't like on this album. Nothing really. Even the weakest song on this album is still solid enough for me to actually enjoy. So it's all good. All great stuff. John Lord really sounds very good on this album. He still has, I think he really kind of brought back at times even his classic organ sound. He really sounds good on this one. Every does. And Ian Pace, goddamn, I really do consider Ian Pace to be one of the most greatest top drummers in general, because of all the bands he's ever worked with. Deep Purple, Gary Moore, Whitesnake. He's always done fucking good. He's just a great drummer, all right? And it's still great that he's still kicking it to this day. So he's just he really knows how to keep a rhythm and a beat. And he just has such a nice power to his playing. And you feel that with this one. And that's another one. Martin Birch knew how to really make Ian Pace sound thunderous. Because that's the best way I can at least describe Ian Pace's drum tone on this one. He's just thunderous on this album. Just again, this is probably one of the best lineups for Whitesnake in general. David Coverdale, Mickey Moody, Bernie Marsden, Neil Murray, Ian Pace, John Lord. This to me is the best lineup I feel David Coverdale has ever had for at least Whitesnake. And it's just good. It really is. At times does also feel like another Deep Purple album, but another good one. So that's where I'm at. This is where my thoughts pretty much end now for this one. So basically now, after Come and Get It was released, Whitesnake are then billed to be a part of the 1981, which would be the second Monsters of Rock, which took place on August 22nd. And which, of course, AC/DC was the headlining band for the second Monsters of Rock. But on the bill, besides AC/DC and Whitesnake, we have Blue Oyster Cult, Slade, Blackfoot, and of course, one of the rare times, at least this new wave or British heavy metal band at least played a pretty big stage, and that was More, which is probably one of the most kind of unique names to add on here, because of More in some cases after Monsters of Rock, they somehow struggled to even get anywhere else because of Blood and Thunder was like the last album More had released. And when More at least played the Monsters of Rock here on August 22nd, 1981, they had Paul Mario Day on vocals still. So they were still on the heels of their debut album Warhead, which again, Paul Mario Day is best known for being one of the singers for Iron Maiden. So it's just a very kind of a unique band to have actually thrown on such a list of a lot of heavy hitters. I mean, again, the fact that More got to share a stage though with the likes of AC/DC, Whitesnake, Blue Oyster Cult, Slade, and Blackfoot were definitely starting to get off the heels because of Marauder, was also being released this year, and I'll then eventually cover that album. But I think they were still off the heels of Tomcattin. They were still off the heels of that one. So, and then Blurs to Cult, which was, well, Fire of an Unknown Origin, which I'll eventually cover on this channel. I don't know what Slade had released. I think it might have been, let me kind of look real quick. I know I'm going off a tangent with this one. But I'm just going to at least see what was the album they would have released at least in 1981. Oh yeah, We'll Bring the House Down was the album that they had released in 1981. Yeah, that was they were so off the heels of this one. Cool, kind of cool artwork kind of there. Nice, almost kind of has a new wave of British heavy metal look to it. But Slade, one of the early, again, groundbreaking British glam rock bands of the sort of the mid 70s, along with the Sweet and T-Rex, or even some of the at least some of that, David Bowie stuff from that time period. Again, that was that part of that glam rock scene. So I know I'm probably missing another band too, but again, just good. All right, so there we go. This is all I really can touch on. So again, they got to play the Monsters of Rock, and I think they end up also after that began to tour with AC/DC as well. Because AC/DC was still coming off the heels of Back in Black. So again, and Whitesnake had just released Come and Get It. So they definitely began to tour with at least AC/DC, I believe, as well during this time. So that's where they end up going, and this is where I'll end up leaving things, because after this, they'll then go back into the studio to then possibly record Saints and Sinners. So this is where everything gets left here. This is where the whole video is now being left off, because now we're bookmarking this. It's now all getting bookmarked. All right, so with Come and Get It reaching its 40th anniversary, again, if you have any memories of growing up with this album, if you were there when it came out, or even if you have any memories of listening to this album many years after it had been released, because you probably had ignored it, or you weren't even born in 1980, or at least in that sort of period, to where you could at least be able to live with this album. But if you have any thoughts on this album, you can leave them in the comment section. Again, the thoughts can either be negative or positive. Doesn't matter. Again, if you have any thoughts that you at one point you were like, yeah, this was a good album, or it's like, I don't think it's as good anymore. Or you probably thought, well, I didn't think it was that great of an album when I first heard it, but many years later, I've come to really like the album. So it definitely grew on me. If you have any of those kind of thoughts, you can leave them in the comments section below. But if you haven't heard this album, well, if you haven't even heard any of the sort of this early era of Whitesnake, and you're only were familiar with at least Slide It In, or of course in many ways what was considered the most groundbreaking album within Whitesnake's discography, that being the 1987 album. If you knew those albums and you really want to at least explore the early sort of material, I'd be quite honest, I don't want to really slag on this album as like anymore, because I think this was a fine album, and if you want to get at least a decent idea, I don't think you would do yourself any wrong with this one. But if you at least want a good taste, maybe Ready and Willing would be fine enough. Or you can easily pick Love Hunter or Trouble, or even the Snakebite EP. You can pick any of those. But I think Come and Get It is a fine album, and I think, again, it would be a good taster, because, again, it sort of has, again, that transitional sound between the sort of very bluesier feel of the earlier material, but at the same time, it's transitioning into more of the 80s, more upbeat kind of hard rock sound that really was starting to take, really took off with like Slide It In. And again, really was even more starting to get more, a lot more realized on Saints and Sinners. But this is a good album, and I think, again, I don't think you would do yourself any wrong with this one. It's still a very enjoyable album, and I think you'll definitely at least like it in some cases. It still is a good album. So there you go. There it is. Now, since this was a bit of a long Album of the Week episode, since I definitely took off in some tangents. I also even broke off and all this sort of stuff, and I still try to stay in line with at least a topic. Well, now that's it. I broke off. Now it's time to break off to another tangent. It's time to at least to announce what is going to be next week's Album of the Week pick. So, what is going to be next week's? You know what? I don't really need to look at my, at least at my calendar to see what is scheduled for next week's Album of the Week, because I already know what it is. It is Spellbound from Tigers of Pantang. Yes, the second album from the new wave of British heavy metal legends. So there you go. That is going to be next week's Album of the Week pick, and I can't wait to talk about that one. That is a great album, and it's definitely one of my personal favorites from Tigers of Pantang. There you go. There is. That ends episode number 106 of Album of the Week. So that I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.